Hi, my name is Jake Boston-Kemper, agronomy lead with Liqui-Grow.
Hi, I'm Katie Hess, Seed and Seed Treatment Manager here at Liqui-Grow. Jake, this week we had a farmer ask us a question about starter. But before we get to that, if you have any questions that you'd like Jake to answer or some topic to cover, let us know. It's questions@liqui-grow.com or send us a direct message and we'll be sure to feature that. So the question the farmer asked us was, he typically uses starter. We're at the end of April, the soils are warming up. Does he still need to use his starter? It requires him to stop and fill more often. He'd really like to get his corn in the ground.
The short answer, Katie, is if your plan was to use starter, there's absolutely no reason to change that plan. In fact, based on the way this year's setting up, I would predict that this would be a very responsive year for starter, okay? So you can't think about the calendar date too much. You have to keep in mind that we've had a very cold April. Typically, we accumulate about 165 growing degree days from April 1st until now. This year we've only accumulated about 90, so we've only accumulated about 60% of the normal growing degree days that we typically would in April. So that means it may be almost the 1st of May, but the soil temperature is still like the middle of April, okay? And I actually do believe that this year could be a very good year for a starter response.
So what does starter provide in these cold, wet soils to our corn crop?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you have cold, wet soils, there's a couple things that are going against you. In warmer soils, phosphorus diffuses a lot farther. In other words, it moves a lot easier in the soil. And remember, it doesn't move very much in the first place. And when it's cold, it doesn't move at all. Okay, so the phosphorus isn't going to move toward the roots. The other thing you have going against you is when soils are cold, the roots don't grow very fast at all. Okay, so the phosphorus isn't very mobile and the roots aren't growing towards it. So phosphorus can be very limited in cold, wet soils.
So it keeps the phosphorus right there next to that small root zone as
Correct.
It's developing.
Yes, if the phosphorus isn't moving and the roots aren't growing, you need to positionally place phosphorus where the roots are.
Are there different types of starters? Is there something we'll see work better than others?
Katie, there's a whole host of different starter fertilizers, in furrow, out of furrow starter fertilizers. It depends.
That sounds like Elite Academy this next winter.
The answer is yes, but it depends on your environment, and I would need to know some more detail to really do a good job at answering that question.
So 2 other quick questions for you. The first one being, every year a farmer uses starter, but do we always see a response out of the bushels? And where would we see that response best?
Yeah, Katie, like any agronomic input that we use, we don't always see a response out of starter. And again, we should probably do a lead session on this, but in brief, no-till, reduced tillage, early planting, anywhere where you expect soils to be cooler than normal or wetter than normal, that's where you're going to tend to see a bigger response from starter, just in general, particularly phosphorus-based starter fertilizers, okay? And that's why I mentioned this year, it is pretty cold relative to the calendar date. So I do think this year could be a good response to starter. Go ahead.
Something folks probably don't think of either is just because you put the starter out there and you didn't see a huge response, you're still keeping that fertilizer in the soil.
Yeah,
correct?
Katie, that's absolutely a great point. You know, you can view it a little bit of as insurance policy if you have those conditions. If you are a no-tiller, you know you're going to have those conditions to some extent, right? So if you don't get a yield increase or an economic return out of starter fertilizer, you still put the nutrients out there. You didn't lose the phosphorus. It's not mobile. It's going to be there. The next corn or soybean crop is going to take it up. In fact, you could reduce the maintenance application rate of phosphorus that you're putting out. And at the end of the day, that starter fertilizer application didn't cost you that much per acre if you take that approach.
Great.
And I think that's an excellent way to think about starter.
Any other comments on starter fertilizer as we wrap up here?
I think just a general comment, you know, we talked about the cold soils. I think that, you know, not only is phosphorus going to be less available, all these nutrients that come from the soil, sulfur, nitrogen, phosphorus, they're going to be delayed in how much they mineralize or how much is available to the crop. So all these, this crop this year is going to be very dependent on fertilizer nutrients because there's not going to be a lot of the nutrients in the soil that are mineralizing until later, okay? So I think it's going to be a good year to make sure that we have a good fertility plan and we have those nutrients out there early in general.
Sounds like we better talk about Cyrus all next week.
Yes.
Well, have a very nice